Today's episode, we will be discussing the torso. What is the torso? The torso is the rib cage and the pelvis, these two basic shapes that then basically are sort of these like egg cups that sort of hold our internal organs and protect everything. And I want to sort of discuss some basic concepts of what the torso means. And so we'll just do some quick little sketches. Then in a sense, this is roughly rib cage shape, pelvis shape. There's sort of this belly that's sort of soft and extra. And then we actually have what's called the great trochanter that comes out from the pelvis, which is really this bone that's coming through. I don't think you can see. Yeah, you can't see. But that's what creates that pop out of our hip as the line comes down, the sort of that pop out. And so from this lower part, that's that awareness too, is we think about male versus female. In general, males tend to have taller and more narrow pelvises. Females tend to have more shorter and wider. And so the angling from where the great trochanter comes out to the knee is more angled for females as it is for males. And so that's just another thing too. This is, when it comes to anatomy and proportions and all of that, it's all about relationships and understanding how they intersect, how the angling of things. I'm going to do a quick little just idea of the push and pull that in a sense is sort of moving if we're leaning back, this compression that our pelvis almost like tilts forward. There's this constant counterbalance that's happening with the body. We had talked about the spine. Let me see, where is that? The spine is this basically as it runs through the center of the form of the body. And we've got here's sort of the clavicle, the scapula, which is sort of the shoulder girdle. And then we have this sort of the pelvis, which is sort of the hip. And that's these two pieces that are holding everything together. This rib cage is sort of this egg shape, right? It's this sort of, we talked about in the gesture class, but it's sort of wider up at the top. There's a bit of here, it's just more the back side of the ribs. And it dips and it's lower in the front. Because we have the scapula and then sort of the atlas. But then that shape, and then the pelvis roughly is this sort of spool shape that happens with the legs. Now, let's see, there we go. From the side, the rib cage is actually angled. There's the spine, here's sort of the bottom of the head. The spine literally starts at the top of the head, the neck, it flows towards the throat, goes back and is along the scapula. I'll show this in this line. You can almost kind of see it too. This line, it comes out, it goes like towards the throat. Let's see where it's best angle. It actually flows towards this throat, then it comes back out. That's basically the cervical spine, and then the thoracic spine is then flowing along the back of the rib cage that then flips, and we do the lumbar spine, which then connects to the sacrum, which is really that whole part of the pelvis, the pelvic girdle, and then our tailbone. And so that shape, the spine, is really sort of dictating this. And again, just as much as we were talking about the flow and the line of the leg that then flows to that, you can see there's this sort of natural spring that's happening. It's this sort of like forward, back, forward. There's this whirling that's happening in the body. And really what that is the shock absorbers. Is our bodies, as we step down, that pressure, it reverberates back up. And if we don't have the ability to absorb that shock, obviously, it's all to protect our brains. It's all this, the whole body is really just a sort of a house and to carry and walk around with our brains. So that idea of just thinking about that we tend to think that it's too straight. We really need to pay attention to that curving situation as that flows and what the spine is actually doing. Now we talk about the rib cage here. I'm going to do a quick sort of diagrams. We're going to be doing a lot of diagrams. not super exciting, but it's important stuff that once you see it and understand it, you can't kind of not see it. You always will understand and be aware of it. So here's a general rib cage shape. And you're like, what is this? This is what they would call, this is basically here, these are the ribs. Here's like our sternum. And then the xiphoid process, which is this bone that drops down. There's someone who's super thin, or that when they pull in, you can kind of see there's this like sharp point that's right there. And that's just another layer of the thing. And actually the like bottom ribs aren't even attached to the sternum. They're sort of free floating. And then we'll do the side thing again, just so we have an idea of where the flat line is of the actual clavicle. You can see how curved it is. If this is from the front, and it's a little bit wider at the base too. It's a little bit than it is at the top theoretically. I mean, men and women, obviously, females generally tend to have smaller rib cages. Males generally tend to have larger ones. This is all just generalizations. This is sort of where like the clavicle situation is. If we're thinking about clavicle viewed from the top, it's actually an S that reaches to the pit of the neck, which that would be this right here, this sort of cavity in our neck. And these are waypoints. These are our guidelines, or sort of landmarks actually on the body, that if you can find that center line, because it really is a center line, this waypoint right here, this like pit of the neck, it tells me where the throat is. It helps me determine the sternocleidomastoid muscle as it goes down towards the clavicle. It tells me where the rib line, the center line of the torso is. So this point is really important. If you can see that on a person, you'll be able to communicate a lot. You'll understand a lot. So this is as though we're looking top down. This is as though we're looking at the clavicle from the front and from above, that you can almost see, because our ribs are an egg shape. It's a cylinder. It literally, the clavicle is almost like a roll cage. It's literally a protector to sort of protect our ribs and our internal organs. Again, here, viewed from the front, it looks much straighter, right? From a front, this shape is pretty straight. You can still, there's a little bit of a bowing, but for the most part. And then there's sort of this lateral and medial. And let me do a quick little example. Lateral, medial, what am I talking about? You'll hear this in medical terms. So where is it? I actually have the exact papers so that it's not too confusing. Do I have it? Shuffling, shuffling, shuffling. Shuffling. Nope, nope, nope. All right, well, is this it? No. Anterior, like posterior, would be the back. Anterior would be the front of the body. Medial would be heading towards the center line, the medium of the body. Lateral means away from the body. And so you can say like the anterior cruciate ligament, sorry, I can't remember what the C part is, but on our knee, right? From that, you can just infer immediately anterior. That means from the front. So that means that's the tendon or the ligament that's running on the front part of the knee. So there's things like that you can basically, the more that you understand basic anatomy terminology, the more that you can interpret and understand and analyze the forms and the shapes that you're looking at, and just we can communicate a little bit clearer. So that's why I say like this is anterior. Oh, here we go, anterior, posterior. And so, and actually, yeah, let me show you too. From above, the rib cage is actually kind of narrower in the back. It's more narrow this way than it is this way. So as you can see, it's almost like kind of like squished a little bit. So we do have a little bit, it's much wider on this way than it is in this when it comes to our ribs. So these are just little things that's like important to think about. And again, I'm gonna do the circle and talk about the cylinder shape. The clavicle, if this is the pit of the neck, the clavicle travels around the rib cage. It actually wraps around, and you can even see that when someone's lifting their arm, that literally is wrapping around our shoulders and around our neck to sort of protect everything. That's something that's to think about. And if we want to then flip to the other side, we're looking at the front in sort of general shapes. From the back, the scapula. Let's see. Scapula, come here. You can kind of see, it's not actually, whoops, or sort of see it. There's this line, whoops. No, I'm gonna make another choice, this one. So this is like basically, there's like a little spine that runs up. This would be the scapula, and you can, these are sort of those wings that come off that you can kind of see right here. It's underneath the latissimus dorsi, it's underneath the trapezius, and this is the trapezius. What is a trapezius muscle? What's a trapezius? It's sort of this weird kite shape, you know, and that is exactly what the trapezius is. It's this giant kite shape that goes from the base of the skull, and it runs all the way down to the edge, and it runs all the way down to pretty much our lower back. And that shape, that whole opening as well, is something that you see, not in this shot, but let's see, let me do another one. You can kind of see, you actually can see in this one, this is the trapezius, this is the back, the front side of the trapezius. Like, so even though it's back here, you can see it from the front. And so that is what that triangle shape is from the person's neck. This is the sternocleidomastoid, these two muscles, there's the pit of the neck right there, right? There's our clavicle. So this is stuff that the more that you understand the basic anatomy and artistic anatomy, bones and muscles, fat deposits, fascia, all of that stuff, the more you're going to be able to see a human form and be able to interpret that. So these are just sort of, I'm trying to just sort of show you again, here, let me show you, this is medial lateral. So this is like someone's back, but then this is here, and this is like their spine and whatnot, but then their shoulder. So that way you understand just sort of like the basics of like the front and back. What does that mean to have the torso? Here, I'm trying to, we could go really far deep into anatomy, but I think that it could be a little bit too much. When it comes to the pelvis, let's discuss. When I say a spool shape, what does that really mean? And that really is this sort of sacrum, ear. And so what's happening is that this is sort of the iliac crest. That's that hip bone that pops out. This is the pubic bone. This is like where we've got all of this. This is, then basically what happens is like this cavity is where our hip, the great trochanter, that attaches to our femur. And so that idea of just remembering, because again, each piece isn't really separate. That's all interconnected. And so just remembering these shapes that then as the body, so here, I'm just gonna get this rib cage situation. Their skin is gonna come out. So for females especially, we're gonna have more of a pop, and that's where we get that more hourglass shape, because theoretically the distance from, say, the bottom of the rib cage to the top of a woman's pelvis, there's more distance versus a man's that may be higher up. And so there's gonna be, that's where you get that more hourglass shape, because it actually then is following and flowing out because it's also wider. And so it's where men tend to have more of a straight line. That's the type of stuff that you're gonna be able to communicate if you understand human forms, where you can literally draw a person from your mind without even having to look at reference. So here I just want to show, do a squiggle example of what a spine is. And then this is this trapezius muscle that I was talking about. That is literally, where's the flow lines? Here we go. It flows, and then here's sort of the scapula. That's the scapula, and it's kind of free floating. It's attached, and the scapula, crazy enough, it attaches to the clavicle. So that's what that high point is on a shoulder. But then there's like this flat point that comes from the trapezius to the scapula clavicle meeting point that then goes and falls down into the deltoid. And so, ooh, here we go, I'll show you. This point, literally, right here, it is literally this meeting point of these two shapes. And that's another landmark. That's another thing that if you can find that little point, that little process, that subcutaneous sort of bone coming through the skin, you're going to be able to then communicate it a little bit clearer, just understanding a little bit more these shapes and forms. Really, when it comes to drawing the human body, right, we're not just flesh, we're not just bone. It's this mixture of that. It's skin and body fat and tissue on top of bone and muscle and tendon and ligaments. And so there's this, how do you communicate something soft but also have hard bone underneath? And so we have to find that balance. And so that's where it's like I'm trying to show these sort of different little regions so that way you can just be a little bit more comfortable with it. Let's see, and I'll show you then. Again, this is sort of from behind the back view, relatively. This is sort of as well the gluteus maximus. Let's do the back for a second. You can even see the way that the muscles are connecting and how it all connects. This is the great trochanter. That is that bone. This is that bone from the femur, the protrusion from the femur, that kind of creates that bump, that sort of from that shape in the hip. And then you can see everything else is connecting up to it. There's a lot of stuff we have, but the gluteus maximus is the overall sort of the shape that's really, it's helping us to stand still, I believe, to stand up, but they actually help us to stand. But that's as well, the flow lines this way. And then I think what's interesting is that, and we'll talk about it more in the legs, is that it actually wraps around and then the hamstrings tuck up underneath. And so there's this other idea too of paying attention to when we're talking about human anatomy, we're thinking about, you know, an intersection of bones and muscles and joints and all this stuff. And so you need to be thinking about that stuff when it comes to intersections. It's very why do I need to know these things? The more that you can understand the underlying anatomy, the more, so I'm just looking for my other stuff, the more that you're able to draw someone from life and be able to see them very clearly. Just want to show really quickly the sternocleidomastoid when I talk about again. What is that? That is this sort of this throat muscle. We've kind of got the larynx right here. And then we even have the trapezius. And so you can even see as it's coming from the backside. And there's this cavity, there's this kind of gap. And this sort of, it spreads, the sternocleidomastoid spreads, but there's this sort of recess, this sort of part that goes through. And so you can kind of, you can kind of push that. That's another layer of things that, again, as you see, I'm using my own body. You have your own body. We are all different to an extent, but we're all mammals. We are all humans, earthlings. We're all vertebrates. We all have endoskeletons. That makes us, all the same in a sense. We all are similar. We all have a basic template. And actually, if you want to talk about that, and we talk about with animals too, all endoskeleton creatures that have vertebrae start off with that basic head, rib cage, pelvis, legs, single bone for the leg, double bone for the lower leg, metatarsal, metacarpal situation, toes, upper arm bone, single bone, double bone, metacarpal finger situation. This is true of a whale, a blue whale, all the way down to the tiniest little, lizards. If you have a spine, you have some sort of version of this default template that comes with having a brain and a spine and internal organs. And that if you can remember that then even a bat, a bird, all creatures that have spines inside their skin will have some sort of version of this. Single bone from the main trunk of the body, two bones as the lower, appendage, and then some sort of finger situation. And then, for a whale, it's fins. It's like it all, and maybe for a horse, it fuses, all those bones fuse into a hoof. But it's variation, it's all about adaptation. And so for humans, as we discuss more, anatomy and figure drawing, really we're talking about what did we adapt so that we can survive. This was us adapting to our environment and our experience so that we can perpetuate our species. And so all of this human machine was created to survive, and things that didn't work stopped being useful, and so therefore was no longer perpetuated in the next generations. And so this is the stuff that, you know, we all are connected. I think that sort of helps me to remember that it's like we're not that different from each other. It's just relationships, it's just proportions. So again, I just want to show again this really quick, this idea of like anterior curve. This is the cervical. And this spine idea, if you can just remember that, because again, when people are drawing people, they forget and it becomes kind of static. I think that's my, like, if I can find, if I can fight that and help people to create more life in their, more vitality, more movement in life, less Egyptian sacrum, and then posterior, post curve. The more that we can remember this sort of experience, the better, the more alive this person is going to be. So here, I'm just going to like filling it in, right? Here's the rib cage, this is the skull, this is the throat. Now we're going to the lower back, here's the pelvis, here's the leg, right? Like it's becoming a person. It doesn't take much to then start to look what it means to become a human being. Our brains are actually primed to look for faces. That's why people find faces in toast and you know, things in the sky or whatever. Our brain is primed to find the pattern of two eyes and a mouth. And so that in itself, like we're always trying to find the pattern of human. I'm gonna now, I mean, we've kind of done a lot of like lecture. It's like, oh gosh, so much lecture. We could go, you know, just so much. I mean, even the pectoral, I'm like, quick, just want to show a quick example of a pectoral muscle. This tucking underneath, it's overlaying. That there's this like overlapping, that's a fan, so it actually opens up when the arm raises and lifts. So this is this type of stuff. These are things that you want to pay attention to. Even sounds strange, but and this is like their head. This is a rib cage. A person, male, female, or whatnot, pectoral muscles, male or female, the nipples will always line up with the spine because, again, we're on a cylinder. And so this is, again, this idea that it's not a box, it's not headlights. So we need to remember that the forms that we're creating, even here, that it's not front, it's off to the side. So even here, theoretically, the nipple would be on this person would be like right there. It's not as forward, it's much more off to the side than you would expect because we're rounding around the body. We could go into so much more in the sense of like abdominals and all of that and sort of, you know, the obliques and the serratus muscles and all of that, which is fun, but it's too much. I'd like to sort of just do a quick study of Jane really fast, my wonderful friend Jane, who's in Perth, Australia. She's a figure model and hosts a lot of lovely sessions and graciously accepted to let me use some of her reference photos. So I'm quickly, again, it's just, you know, focused on the torso for this one. But even then, as we had talked about in the gesture stuff, contrapposto, if I were to draw the line of where my shoulder to hip angling, there's definitely that. It's not square. From that, because I know the body, I can infer that she's kind of putting more weight on this leg and less weight on that leg. So I don't even have to see it, I'm just interpreting it. I just know that that's what's happening. With that too, now I'm gonna switch to the arms really fast. Even though we're focusing on torso, I just wanna have a sense of it. You wanna have at least an idea of an arm of somewhat completion, or else it feels a little empty. We'll talk about more of this later, but the idea of like cropping and whatnot, and also relationships. So the bottom of the rib cage is another landmark for the elbow. So if you're questioning the length of the humerus, and we'll go through the arms later, that's another thing that you can use as a reference, that the bottom of the elbow will reach the bottom of the rib bone, the rib cage itself. And so there's sort of that where it radiates out. And so again, it's this idea of like, will that make sense? if I pulled it in too short or too far, and we were to imagine to drop their arms down, would it fit? Those are the things that you want to think about too. It's just go beyond what you see and actually imagine, use your mind's eye to interpret. Imagine them moving, imagine them readjusting. This is a pose that we're actually going to do. She's actually holding, so I'm going to, this is just a photo for now, but I wanted to just sort of show you the basic anatomy of what I'm talking about. So here, in a sense, is her clavicle, and you can see it's almost starts here, and she's lifting her arm, so it kind of lifts up a little bit. There's this line, the sternocleidomastoid, as it goes to here. These are key points that if you want to pick up, that then we have that triangle, that angling of the triangle. And then let's see, just do a quick little eye, and you can even center line for the face, but we don't really want to worry about too much with the head. But again, there's this sort of, it's hard to see, but there's still a little bit of a triangle shape from the back, and then as well, another sternocleidomastoid from the other side coming down. Now, I had her wear the striped suit so that you can literally see the wrapping around, of the body. You can literally see as it turns what is actually happening. And even as she's like tilting, obviously you can see like which hip is higher based on that information, right? So this hip is like, this hip's higher. Where are the relationships of things, and even the wrapping around of the body. And this could be something you can experiment with too, is like, what, if you were to do hatching and stuff, how would you interpret that? How would you render the body? Or like, what they would call in a sense is like cross contour. And this is like following the contour of the body, across the contour of the body. So you can see just really, I'm thinking about where's her rib cage, the center line of the rib cage. I'm looking at the pelvis there, roughly. You can even kind of see where the leg line sort of starts. So this is stuff that is helpful for us, as we can interpret and look at, just see these underlying shapes, even with clothes on. Of course, if there's a nude model, you'll see even more sort of the anatomy and shape and musculature. But even then, we can infer with our own minds, we can interpret. So I wanted to do one from back and see it twisting. What does that mean to have the torso twisting? It's very easy to have it be in the same planes, but to have one twist takes it to another level. So going to quickly do, now again, I'm looking at we're doing the center line, but this time instead of the center line from the pit of the neck, I'm using the spine. Well, the spine, it's almost like at a 3/4 view. The edge of this, the distance from the spine to this side is a lot shorter, obviously, than it is as it wraps around towards the front. And these are the things that you want to think about when you're rendering, so that you can communicate that twist, right? And what does that mean to turn and twist the body to then have this sort of rough shape? And because she's pushing her hip, more weight is up on the left leg, her left leg, I'm going to drop this, put her this way. It's kind of lower a little bit. And then again, I'm going to put in arm so that we can communicate that. And then this will be the neck, and then other arm, as you can see. But this twisting that's happening. It's also proportions, it's relationships between the distance of one thing to the other. Same here with this. If the center line for the back side, I'm giving less width than I am on this side. So again, I'm saying there's more here on this side than there is on this side. It's all about communicating. What do I see? What do I understand? And then how can I interpret that into a 2-dimensional rendering of a 3-dimensional piece? Like, it's tough. This is not easy. Another thing too is I'm like hesitant to do is cropping. Theoretically, this is where the knee would be. I don't want to crop it there because then it suddenly looks like they're amputated. So I want to I'm going to crop it like there where it kind of is instead, because it just makes it less stressful, because our brains need information. And if we crop something, say at the elbow or at the knee, there's no fill in the blank information. And so our brain's like, oh, it just got chopped off. That's a problem. So even how you crop your drawings and edit your drawings is going to determine how well and how successful it'll be. I'm going to do like this cross contour is a kind of like there's that dip, whoop, and then it comes back around. This idea of this twisting. You can flow along that the body and finding these forms. The more that you can understand that turning shape, as well as this twisting, and maybe I really need to emphasize if it was just drawing the fabric, you emphasize the bunching up of the fabric, you'd emphasize this, you know, and the stretching as it pulls down that way, or, you know, there's different ways you can use to communicate, but that's something that, you know, with costume you can also do as well. Next episode, we'll be discussing legs and feet.